The papers Elena Crenshaw spread across Dayton Mercer's kitchen table looked official enough. Corporate letterhead, legal seals, signatures that seemed legitimate. But something was wrong with the dates. The mineral rights documents showed a transfer on March 15, 1987, but the county records Dayton had checked 3 times showed no transactions on that date. Nothing at all. The woman in the expensive suit smiled, but her eyes held something colder. She knew something about these papers that she wasn't saying. The deal wasn't clean, and she knew it. 3 weeks earlier, Dayton Mercer had stood in the courthouse parking lot, holding the deed to 800 acres of prime ranch land in his calloused hands. After 15 years of saving every dollar from his job at the feed mill, he finally owned the land he'd dreamed about since childhood. The rolling hills stretched toward the horizon, dotted with oak trees and crossed by a clear-running creek that had never gone dry, even during the worst drought years. He'd paid $260,000 at the judicial auction, money that represented his entire life savings, his father's inheritance, and a loan against his pickup truck. The auctioneer had called it fair and square, but Dayton knew the land was worth twice what he'd paid. Something about the low turnout had bothered him that day, but he'd been too excited to question his good fortune. Now, looking at Elena Crenshaw's documents, he understood why the bidding had been so light. Meridian Global Mining claimed they owned the subsurface mineral rights to his property, dating back decades before the auction. The papers stated clearly that any surface owner must provide access for mineral extraction operations. Elena explained that recent geological surveys had revealed significant lithium deposits beneath his hills, deposits that had become incredibly valuable with the electric vehicle boom. What had been worthless rock in 1987 was now worth millions per acre. She spoke in legal terms about established precedent and existing contracts, but Dayton couldn't look away from those dates that didn't match the county records he'd researched so carefully before bidding. Elena tapped her manicured finger on the contract signature line. According to her, the previous landowner had signed away the mineral rights in 1987 to cover gambling debts. The signature looked real enough, but Vernon Hazel, the neighboring rancher, had told Dayton last week that old man Patterson, who owned this land back then, couldn't write his own name, much less sign legal documents. Vernon had laughed about it, saying Patterson always made his mark with an X, never learned to read or write past the 3rd grade. Something was deeply wrong with these documents, and Elena Crenshaw's confident smile suggested she knew exactly what Dayton was thinking. She collected the papers slowly, deliberately, like she was giving him time to absorb the implications. The silence stretched between them, until she finally spoke words that made his blood run cold. She said Meridian Global would begin preliminary surveys next Monday, whether he cooperated or not. But what she didn't mention was the phone call her company had received yesterday from someone who claimed to have proof that would change everything. After Elena Crenshaw's black sedan disappeared down the gravel road, Dayton drove straight to Vernon Hazel's ranch. He found the 70-year-old man mending fence in the south pasture, the same place Vernon had worked his cattle for 43 years. When Dayton showed him the mineral rights documents, Vernon's weathered face went pale. He set down his wire cutters and studied the signature with growing alarm. The writing was too neat, too confident for a man who'd never learned to write his name. Vernon's hand started shaking as he read the witness signature at the bottom. The name read, James Crenshaw, dated March 15, 1987, Elena's father. Vernon's face went white. He remembered that exact date because his prize bull had broken through Patterson's fence, and Vernon had spent the entire day helping Patterson repair the damage. They'd worked together from sunrise to sunset, sharing lunch and complaining about the cost of fence wire. Patterson had been alone that day. No visitors, no business meetings. There was no way Patterson could have signed legal documents that day with witnesses he'd never met. The implications hit Dayton like a physical blow. Elena Crenshaw hadn't just inherited these mineral rights contracts from her company. Her family had been involved in creating them. The documents weren't just questionable, they were fraudulent. But proving it would be another matter entirely. Elena's company had unlimited legal resources, teams of lawyers, and connections that reached into state government. Dayton had his life savings already invested in the land, and barely enough left over to hire a local attorney for basic contract review. Vernon walked to his old pickup truck and pulled out a metal toolbox from behind the seat. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, was a collection of documents and photographs he'd kept for decades. Property surveys, fence agreements, old tax records, Vernon explained that he'd always been meticulous about documentation, especially regarding boundary disputes and easement rights. His father had taught him that land ownership meant nothing without paper to prove it. As Vernon sorted through the documents, he pulled out a folder marked Patterson Property 1985-1990 and handed it to Dayton. Inside were copies of property tax records showing Patterson as sole owner with no mineral rights exceptions listed. County Land Office receipts from 1987 showed no recorded mineral rights transfers. Most importantly, there was a handwritten note from the county clerk stating that Patterson always made his mark with an X because he was illiterate. The note was dated March 20th, 1987, just 5 days after the supposed mineral rights signing. Vernon had requested the note for a fence easement dispute, never imagining it would someday expose a corporate conspiracy. But as Dayton studied the documents, Vernon's expression changed from satisfaction to deep concern. He'd remembered something else about that March day in 1987, something that made Elena Crenshaw's visit today far more dangerous than either of them realized. Vernon's hands trembled as he set down the documents. That March day in 1987 wasn't just about forged signatures. Vernon remembered now why the date stuck so clearly in his memory. 3 days after they'd repaired the fence together, Patterson was found dead in his cabin. Heart attack, the coroner said. But Vernon had helped Patterson move hay bales just days before. The man was stronger than most 30-year-olds despite being 67. His heart had never given him trouble. The timing was too perfect. Someone forged Patterson's signature on March 15th. Patterson died on March 18th, before anyone could question the papers. Vernon had attended the funeral, watched Patterson's nephew from California sell the property quickly to pay estate taxes. The nephew never asked about mineral rights. Now Vernon understood why the auction had been so quiet. Word had spread that the mineral rights were already claimed. Dayton felt the trap closing around him. Elena's confidence made sense now. Her family had orchestrated everything: forge the documents, eliminate the witness, then wait for the right moment. The land had changed hands 3 times since Patterson's death, each owner unaware of the time bomb waiting beneath the surface. With lithium now worth millions, it was time to collect. Vernon pulled out his cell phone and scrolled through his contacts. He knew a retired sheriff's deputy named Marcus Webb, who had worked the Patterson case back in 1987. Marcus had always been suspicious about the heart attack, especially since Patterson had no history of cardiac problems and the timing seemed questionable. But without evidence of foul play, the case was closed as natural causes. Marcus might remember details that could help prove the pattern of fraud and possibly worse. But as Vernon started to dial Marcus's number, Dayton's phone rang. The caller ID showed a blocked number. When he answered, Elena Crenshaw's voice was different than it had been that morning. Colder, more threatening. She informed him that Meridian Global's survey team would arrive Monday morning at 7 sharp to begin preliminary soil testing. Any interference with their operations would result in immediate legal action and criminal charges for obstruction of a valid mineral rights contract. The survey would require heavy equipment access through his property, including drilling rigs that would need to cross his cattle pastures. Elena's final words carried a warning that made both men exchange worried glances. She mentioned that property owners who had cooperated with Meridian Global in other states had found the process much smoother than those who chose to fight. But what she didn't say was that Meridian Global had been monitoring Vernon's property records search from that morning. They knew exactly what documents he'd been pulling from the county database. The retired sheriff's deputy Marcus Webb lived in a small house on the outskirts of town, surrounded by the kind of security that spoke to a man who'd made enemies during his law enforcement career. When Dayton and Vernon arrived that evening, Marcus listened to their story with the practiced patience of someone who'd heard thousands of suspicious tales over 30 years in uniform. But when Vernon mentioned the date of Patterson's death, Marcus's expression shifted. He disappeared into his study and returned with a thick file folder marked Patterson William, 1987. Marcus spread crime scene photos across his kitchen table. Patterson had been found in his kitchen chair, slumped over a cup of coffee that was still warm when neighbors discovered the body. The coroner's report listed myocardial infarction, but Marcus had always questioned the findings. Patterson's coffee cup contained traces of digoxin, a heart medication that Patterson had never been prescribed. The levels were within the range that could occur naturally during a heart attack, but Marcus had wondered why Patterson would have digoxin in his system at all. More troubling was the condition of Patterson's cabin when the body was discovered. Drawers had been pulled out slightly, as if someone had searched through them carefully and tried to hide the evidence. Patterson's strongbox, where he kept important papers, was found open with the key still in the lock. The neighbors who found the body said Patterson always kept that box locked, even when he was home. But the county sheriff had ruled the death natural causes and closed the investigation within 48 hours. Marcus explained that pressure had come from above to wrap up the case quickly. Phone calls from the state capitol, suggestions that pursuing an investigation into an elderly man's death would waste taxpayer resources. Marcus had been a young deputy then, not senior enough to push back, but he'd kept copies of everything, including photographs of Patterson's signature on various documents over the years. Everyone showed the characteristic X mark that Patterson used instead of writing his name. The most damning evidence was a receipt for fence materials that Patterson had signed just days before his death. The receipt showed Patterson's typical X mark, witnessed by the hardware store owner who confirmed Patterson couldn't write his name. This directly contradicted the mineral rights documents showing a flowing signature supposedly written by Patterson on March 15th. Marcus had suspected fraud back then, but without Patterson alive to confirm he hadn't signed the mining documents, the case had no foundation. As Marcus organized the evidence, Dayton's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. The message contained a single photograph taken from a distance, showing the three men sitting at Marcus's kitchen table, clearly taken from outside the house within the last few minutes. Below the image was a single line of text that made Dayton's blood run cold. The message warned that some investigations were too dangerous for their own good. Marcus Webb immediately turned off the lights and moved away from the kitchen window. In 30 years of law enforcement, he'd learned to take surveillance seriously. Someone with professional equipment was watching his house, close enough to capture clear images through the window, far enough away to remain undetected. The timing wasn't coincidental. Less than 2 hours after Dayton and Vernon had brought him the Patterson evidence, Meridian Global already knew about their investigation. Marcus pulled out his secure phone and made a call to his former partner, Detective Sarah Kellerman, who now worked financial crimes for the State Bureau. Sarah had always been the tech expert on their team. She was capable of tracing corporate connections that most small-town investigators missed. When Marcus explained the situation, Sarah's response was immediate and alarming. Meridian Global Mining wasn't just another extraction company. They were a subsidiary of Chen Industries, a multinational conglomerate with ties to foreign investment groups that specialized in acquiring American mineral rights through shell companies and legal manipulation. The Patterson case fit a pattern that Sarah had been tracking for months. Small landowners across 3 states had been approached by Meridian Global with similar mineral rights claims, all dating back decades, all involving elderly original landowners who had died shortly after the supposed document signings. Sarah had identified at least 7 cases where suspicious deaths had occurred within days of mineral rights transfers, but local law enforcement had consistently ruled them natural causes or accidents. More troubling was Meridian Global's track record, with property owners who refused to cooperate. 2 ranchers in Wyoming had experienced mysterious equipment failures that contaminated their water supplies. A family farm in Colorado had suffered a barn fire that destroyed their cattle feed storage, forcing them to sell their livestock at a loss. A widow in Montana had faced a series of frivolous lawsuits that drained her legal defense fund. In each case, the property owners eventually sold their land to Meridian Global at below-market prices. Sarah explained that Chen Industries operated through a network of local attorneys, county officials, and business leaders who facilitated their land acquisition strategies. The company identified valuable mineral deposits years in advance, then used various methods to pressure current owners into selling. Forged documents were just one tool in their arsenal. They also employed environmental contamination, legal harassment, and financial pressure to achieve their goals. As Sarah spoke, Dayton realized the full scope of what they were facing. This wasn't just about his property or Patterson's murder. Elena Crenshaw and her company were part of an organized effort to steal mineral rights across the American West. The lithium beneath his hills was worth millions, but the larger operation involved billions of dollars in natural resources. Fighting back wouldn't just mean challenging a mining company, it would mean exposing an international conspiracy. Marcus ended the call and turned to face both men. His expression was grim, but determined. Sarah had agreed to open an official investigation, But she needed more evidence than just their suspicions about Patterson's death. They had one advantage that Meridian Global didn't expect. Sarah had been monitoring the company's communications for weeks, and she'd intercepted something that could change everything. The intercepted communication was an encrypted email between Elena Crenshaw and her superior at Chen Industries, dated just 3 days ago. Sarah had forwarded the decrypted message to Marcus's secure phone. The content was damning. Elena had written that the Patterson property acquisition was proceeding on schedule, but she expressed concern about potential witnesses who might remember details from 1987. The email specifically mentioned Vernon Hazel as a risk factor who should be monitored closely. More shocking was Elena's request for approval to use what she called standard pressure techniques if Dayton Mercer refused to cooperate with the mineral extraction. The response from Chen Industries was swift and brutal. Elena was authorized to implement whatever measures were necessary to secure access to the lithium deposits, including relocation assistance for any problematic neighbors. The corporate language was clinical, but the meaning was clear. They were prepared to use intimidation, financial pressure, or worse to get what they wanted. The email exchange also revealed the scope of Chen Industries' operation in the region. They had identified mineral deposits on 6 additional properties within a 20-mile radius of Dayton's land. All 6 properties had similar patterns of questionable mineral rights documents dating back to the 1980s and 1990s. Chen Industries was planning a coordinated acquisition campaign that would give them control over one of the largest lithium reserves in North America. Vernon's phone rang while Marcus was reading the emails aloud. The caller ID showed the county tax assessor's office. When Vernon answered, the voice on the other end delivered news that made his face go pale. The tax assessor informed him that a clerical error had been discovered in his property records. His annual tax bill was being recalculated based on new mineral assessment values. Instead of his usual $3,200 tax bill, Vernon now owed $47,000 in back taxes, due within 30 days or face foreclosure proceedings. Dayton felt his stomach drop. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. Chen Industries was applying pressure to Vernon, just as the emails had suggested. They were using the tax system to force him into financial distress, creating a situation where Vernon would have no choice but to sell his property to pay the inflated tax bill. The same strategy had probably been used against other property owners who stood in their way. Marcus made another call, this time to the county tax assessor's office. His conversation was brief but heated. When he hung up, his expression was furious. The reassessment had been ordered by a consulting firm hired by the county to review mineral rights valuations. The consulting firm was a subsidiary of Chen Industries. They were literally using their own company to inflate property taxes on land they wanted to acquire. As the 3 men absorbed the implications of this latest development, Dayton's phone buzzed with another text message. This one wasn't from Elena Crenshaw. The message came from an unknown number, but the content suggested it was from someone inside Chen Industries who wanted to help. The message contained GPS coordinates and a time, midnight tonight. It ended with a warning that this would be their only chance to get evidence that could stop the entire operation. The GPS coordinates led them to an abandoned grain silo 5 miles outside town. Marcus insisted on driving separately and arriving first to check for surveillance. The location was smart, isolated enough for privacy, but visible enough that any approaching vehicles could be spotted from a distance. At 11:45, a single car pulled up to the silo. The driver was a woman in her 30s with nervous energy and a manila envelope clutched in her hands. She introduced herself as Rebecca Torres, a financial analyst for Chen Industries who had been working on the mineral rights acquisition project for 6 months. Rebecca explained that she'd discovered the pattern of fraudulent documents and suspicious deaths while conducting due diligence for the company's expansion plans. She went on to reveal that Chen Industries had been systematically forging mineral rights documents across 7 states, using local contacts to file fraudulent claims dating back decades. The manila envelope contained copies of internal Chen Industries communications, financial records, and operational directives that proved the conspiracy reached the highest levels of the corporation. Rebecca had documented at least 15 cases where elderly property owners had died within days of supposed mineral rights signings, all ruled natural causes by local coroners who received consulting payments from Chen Industries subsidiaries. The Patterson case wasn't isolated. It was part of a coordinated campaign to steal billions of dollars in American natural resources. Most damaging was a recorded phone call between Elena Crenshaw and her supervisor discussing the need to eliminate problematic witnesses from the Patterson era. The conversation was clinical in its brutality. Elena reported that Vernon Hazel posed a significant risk because he could testify about Patterson's presence on March 15, 1987, contradicting their forged documents. Her supervisor authorized whatever methods were necessary to ensure Vernon's silence, including arranging for an accident if financial pressure didn't work. Rebecca explained that she'd been ordered to leave town after delivering the tax reassessment documents to Vernon immediately. Chen Industries was planning to accelerate their timeline. If Dayton didn't sign the access agreement by tomorrow morning, they would begin immediate legal proceedings to seize the property under eminent domain laws. Elena had convinced a federal judge that the lithium deposits were critical to national security, justifying emergency acquisition procedures. The recorded conversation also revealed Chen Industries' backup plan if legal methods failed. They had arranged for environmental contamination to be introduced into Dayton's water supply, making the property uninhabitable and forcing a distressed sale. The contamination would appear to come from natural sources, but Rebecca had documentation showing Chen Industries had purchased industrial chemicals that would create the desired effect without leaving obvious traces. Rebecca handed over a second envelope containing financial records that traced payments from Chen Industries to local officials, including the county sheriff, the tax assessor, and 2 county commissioners. The corruption network had been operating for over a decade, facilitating land acquisitions across the region. Every official who had dismissed suspicious deaths or approved questionable property transfers had received payments disguised as consulting fees. As Rebecca prepared to leave, she delivered one final warning that made all 3 men realize how immediate the danger had become. Elena Crenshaw was scheduled to arrive at Dayton's property at 7 in the morning with a federal marshal and a court order for immediate possession. They had less than 8 hours to stop her. At 6:30 the next morning, Detective Sarah Kellerman arrived at Dayton's property with a team of federal agents and an arrest warrant for Elena Crenshaw. Rebecca's evidence had been enough to convince a federal judge that Chen Industries was operating a criminal enterprise designed to defraud American property owners of their mineral rights. The recorded phone calls discussing the elimination of witnesses had triggered immediate federal intervention under organized crime statutes. Elena arrived precisely at 7 o'clock with her federal marshal and court order, unaware that her own communications had been intercepted and analyzed by federal investigators. When she stepped out of her black sedan, Sarah Kellerman was waiting with handcuffs. The arrest was swift and professional. Elena's confident smile disappeared as Sarah read the charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, racketeering, accessory to murder, and violation of federal mineral rights laws. The federal marshal who had accompanied Elena was equally shocked to learn that his court order had been obtained through fraudulent evidence. The judge who had signed the eminent domain seizure had been shown forged documents and false environmental impact studies prepared by Chen Industries. Within weeks, the federal court had vacated the seizure order and launched a comprehensive investigation into judicial misconduct. Rebecca's evidence triggered a massive federal investigation that spread across 7 states. Over the following weeks, Chen Industries' stock price collapsed as investors fled the company. The FBI raided corporate offices in 12 cities, seizing thousands of documents that revealed the full scope of the mineral rights fraud. Local officials who had been receiving payments from Chen Industries were systematically arrested, including the county sheriff who had covered up Patterson's suspicious death. The forged mineral rights documents were officially invalidated by federal court order. Dayton's ownership of his property, including all mineral rights, was confirmed and protected under federal law. Chen Industries was ordered to pay punitive damages of $12 million to Dayton for the attempted theft of his property. The company also faced criminal prosecution and civil lawsuits from dozens of other property owners across the country. Vernon Hazel received similar federal protection for his property, and his inflated tax bill was canceled as evidence of criminal harassment. The tax assessor who had processed the fraudulent reassessment was arrested and charged with conspiracy to commit extortion. Vernon's testimony about Patterson's final days became crucial evidence in establishing the timeline of the original fraud. Marcus Webb was vindicated for his suspicions about Patterson's death 36 years earlier. The reopened investigation revealed that Patterson had been poisoned with digoxin, administered in his coffee by someone with medical knowledge who had access to cardiac medications. While the specific killer was never identified, the evidence clearly connected Patterson's death to the mineral rights fraud, orchestrated by Elena's father. 6 months later, Dayton stood on his front porch, watching his cattle graze in the pastures he had fought so hard to protect. The federal investigation had concluded with Chen Industries facing criminal prosecution and complete corporate dissolution. The $12 million in punitive damages had allowed him to expand his ranch operation and hire additional staff. More importantly, his victory had exposed a criminal conspiracy that had been stealing from American landowners for decades. Federal legislation now required enhanced verification procedures for all mineral rights transfers, making similar fraud much more difficult. The lithium deposits beneath his hills remained untouched, protected by federal environmental restrictions that Dayton had requested to prevent any future mining operations. He had chosen to preserve the land, rather than profit from its mineral wealth. His transformation from victim to victor was complete. But more than that, he had become a symbol of how ordinary citizens could fight back against corporate corruption and win. If you enjoyed this story, click the video on your screen now to watch another unforgettable story, where courage and determination collide with powerful forces in ways you never expected. Don't forget to subscribe and consider a super chat to help us keep bringing you more stories like these. Your support means everything to us.